Welcome to the Explainer. So, today we are unpacking one of the most critical and, honestly, highly technical components of modern AI architecture, the AgentScope 2.0 workspace. If you're building complex AI systems, you already know that agents need a dedicated place to actually get things done. You can think of the workspace as the physical agent's office. It's the place where your AI goes to work, accesses its tools, and stores its files. We're going to break down exactly how this office is built, how it operates, and how it scales.
Okay, let's dive into this. We'll be looking at Welcome to the Workspace, 3 flavors of execution, plugging into the agent, managing multi-tenant workspaces, and bridging the MCP gateway. Let's get to it.
Section 1. Welcome to the Workspace, the foundational execution environment.
So let's set the foundation here. What is this workspace exactly? Basically, it's the agent's execution environment. It completely owns the lifecycle of any resources living inside it. Think about that office analogy again. If the agent's language model is its brain, well, the workspace is the actual corporate building it sits in. It controls what supplies come in, what data goes out, and how the lights stay on. It manages everything from server processes to offloaded files, ensuring your agent has a clean, controlled environment to actually operate in.
Now, every productive office needs supplies, right? And this one provides 3 main things. First up, tools. These can be your standard built-in tools or Model Context Protocol, MCP tools. Second, skills. And third, it gives us context offloading. Now, you can picture this last one like a giant filing cabinet. When messages get compressed or when tool results are just way too big, the workspace gives the agent a place to offload all that massive data. It keeps the agent's immediate desk totally clear of clutter and memory bloat.
To keep this office running smoothly, the Workspace-based interface handles 4 core jobs. Number 1 is lifecycle. That means initializing the workspace, closing it down to release resources, or resetting the state so a pool of agents can reuse it. Next is discovery. This lets the agent actually see what available tools, active MCP clients, and skills are lying around. Third is offloading, where the workspace stores that heavy context we just talked about and hands back a tiny reference path instead. And finally, dynamic management. This is super cool because it lets you actively add or remove MCP servers and skills at runtime, and it persists those changes. So even if there's a restart, you don't lose your setup. It's an absolute game changer for long-running workflows.
Moving on to Section 2, 3 flavors of execution: local, Docker, and E2B.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is seeing how this actually runs out in the wild. AgentScope gives us 3 distinct workspace flavors mapped to different backends. First, the local workspace, running straight on your host file system. Then, the DockerWorkspace, which fires up a Docker container using AO Docker. And finally, the E2B workspace, which taps into an E2B cloud sandbox via async sandbox. But here is the absolute key takeaway. Even though these implementations use totally different backends, from your laptop to a cloud sandbox, they all shared the exact same workspace-based interface. This means the agent code you write is going to run flawlessly on any of these backends without you having to change a single line of code.
But while the interface is identical, the way they handle persistence definitely isn't. Local and Docker rely entirely on the host system. Local saves state right under a workdir directory on the host. Docker does something similar. It bind-mounts that host workdir straight into the container, so your data survives if the container restarts. Now, E2B persistence? Totally different beast. It uses the cloud sandbox file system itself. There is literally 0 host workdir. Instead, the system tracks a workspace ID in its E2B metadata, so on restart, it just looks up that ID and reconnects. You can seamlessly pause and resume your state entirely in the cloud.
On to Section 3, plugging into the agent, wiring up resources, and offloading.
Okay, we've built the walls of our agent's office, we've picked a location, so let's install the plumbing. A workspace plugs into the agent along 2 main axes. First, the resources axis. Here, the agent's toolkit is populated directly from the workspace. It pulls in all those built-in tools, MCP-provided tools, and skills, perfectly equipping the agent for whatever it needs to do. Then, there's the offloading axis. The agent actually uses the workspace as a kind of pressure release valve. Whenever context compression kicks in or a tool result is just too massive, the agent calls the workspace's offload functions. The workspace securely stores the huge original payload, and the agent just holds on to a tiny reference path. Now, because the workspace just lists out all these resources in a flat way, things can get pretty crowded.
So here's a quick pro tip. When your agents have way too many tools, do not overwhelm their context window. Seriously. Instead, partition those tools into tool groups. You hand these groups to the toolkit, and the agent can dynamically activate specific groups only when it actually needs them, using the built-in Reset Tools meta tool. This means only the essential, basic group stays always on. It's such a brilliant way to handle tool bloat.
All right, let's shift gears. Section 4, Managing Multi-Tenant Workspaces, Scaling Up with the Workspace Manager.
When you're scaling up from a single agent to a full-blown enterprise, multi-tenant deployment, the Workspace Manager becomes absolutely essential. It's the core allocator and lifecycle owner that the agent service uses to map incoming requests. And its job is huge. First up, allocation. It creates and tracks new workspaces. Second is caching and TTL, or time to live. Workspaces sit in memory, and the manager actively evicts idle ones after a while, tearing down resources like containers to save you money. Third, it enforces the isolation policy, which decides if two requests should share a workspace or not. And finally, cleanup. It makes sure the cache is fully drained when the app shuts down so you don't get hit with memory leaks.
Let's take a closer look at how different managers handle those isolation policies, because this is cool. Both the local and E2B workspace managers isolate purely by agent ID. Simple enough. But look at the DockerWorkspace manager. It isolates by a tuple of both user ID and agent ID. This gives you a much tighter sandbox, which is exactly what you need in complex multi-user environments where keeping data separate is absolutely critical. And hey, if you need a per-session policy or some custom hybrid thing, the Workspace Manager base is super flexible. Just subclass it, override the king, and boom, you've got your own custom routing rules.
Finally, Section 5, Bridging the MCP Gateway, Crossing the Isolation Boundary.
This brings us to our last, and frankly, most advanced structural problem. See, Docker and E2B cannot register host-side MCP clients directly. Why? Because the Model Context Protocol servers live completely locked inside that tightly isolated container or cloud sandbox. Standard input and output sessions just can't pierce that boundary to reach the host where the agent is running. And obviously, if the agent can't talk to the tools, the whole system just breaks down. To fix this, AgentScope introduces the MCP gateway, and this brilliantly illustrates how data safely jumps across that isolation gap. The data path starts at the host agent toolkit. It opens up an authenticated HTTPS connection using a bearer token that gets freshly minted every single time the workspace initializes. That secured token talks straight to the MCP gateway, which, by the way, is just a lightweight fast API process running inside the isolated workspace. From there, the gateway routes the traffic down to the isolated MCP servers. It's essentially acting as a secure HTTP-based bridge right through the container walls.
On the host side, AgentScope gives us two adapters that make this whole complex process totally invisible to the agent code. First, the Gateway MCP client. This is basically an adapter pretending to be a local MCP client on the host. It catches standard calls like connect or list tools and flips them into HTTP requests aimed at the gateway. Then we have the Gateway MCP tool. This adapter posts directly to the gateway's REST surface and flawlessly reconstructs the return tool chunks. So the big takeaway here is that because of these adapters, the workspace returns MCP client instances identically, whether your session is local or isolated in the cloud. Your code literally doesn't have to change a bit.
So we've covered the core of this incredibly powerful environment today, from the execution backends to scaling up with workspace managers, and finally piercing that isolation wall with the MCP gateway. Which leaves us with one final thought. How will you structure your own multi-tenant AI systems using the flexible, isolated architectural blueprint of AgentScope 2.0? The tools to build incredibly scalable agents are right here. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep building.